arts, and especially avant-garde kung fu and Chinese kung fu, and a little bit about the Chinese community and experience in Canada. Hopefully you enjoy it. We have Sifu Robin on to tell us all about it. So growing up where I did, I was very, very lucky to have people around me that when I did finally move to Toronto and become a bouncer, I had the skills I needed to survive. And this is one of the guys, and he's got a lot more to talk about than just martial arts, but we're going to get into life story, we're going to get into the history of martial arts and whatever, essentially whatever wisdom he wants to share.
Yeah, we like to set the record straight on some popular myths here, and there are certainly a lot of popular myths surrounding martial arts.
Yeah, big time in the especially in like the Western culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I came up as a martial artist just before UFC 1 was in '93, and that completely changed the popular perception of martial arts. So just seeing that sea change, like in martial arts and the focus and everything was just.
Well, I would imagine there's still a lot of people who think it works like Jackie Chan, where you just do some quick hand moves and do a backflip or something.
It doesn't.
Well, you tell me. You're the expert. You're the expert. I'm just here to hear your stories.
Yeah. Now the first qualification that can we call you Robin?
Yeah.
Rob, the first qualification Robin had is he grew up in Cabbagetown, back when Cabbagetown was one bakery and a line of boxing gyms. So you can tell us a little bit about growing up in Toronto when it was a little more rough and tumble. Yeah. Strip 1 and Strip 2 was Yonge Street and Church Street. And, it's a lot. We talk about, color, but.
Mm-hmm. Well, I grew up, initially I grew up actually on Elm Street, which is Yonge, Dundas. The big things were A&A Records, Sam the Record Man, and that sort of thing. Yonge Street Mall in the early 70s and stuff like that. Moved to Cabbagetown when I was 10 or 12, I think, somewhere around that area. And I don't know if it was moving upwards or downwards as far as my socioeconomic being was. The first night I moved into Cabbagetown, we lived on Spruce Street, right beside a school. And the first night I was there was a big fight in the schoolyard beside us. A bunch of kids were punching each other out, and so I decided to go out like an idiot and say, because I was sleeping. I was sleeping. I was like, what the hell are you guys doing, and all that sort of stuff, and they all stopped because there's a stranger there, that just moved in. And he's kind of in front of us. So what the hell's going on? But I was actually it's interesting. I was able to kind of talk him down and then get back to sleep. And I said, I'm calling the cops, blah 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 blah. And eventually they dispersed. So I guess I did something right that first night. Cabbagetown back then, and especially that area, it was just north of Gerrard. It was interesting. There a lot of lower socioeconomic situations there. A lot of alcoholism, a lot of, family strife and single parent families and all that. But it was a real community, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Because you saw the anything from basic social survival to success stories. I mean, this was before Cabbagetown became the $2 million house things and everybody has the fluffy dogs.
All the march of gentrification into all these neighborhoods that has displaced a lot of what I considered Toronto, it doesn't exist anymore. Well, it's these communities you were talking about that made Toronto so special.
There's never going to be another bare naked ladies coming out of this city.
No, there's not even going to be another Drake coming out of the city. It's
It certainly changed. It certainly changed. And I mean that's kind of evolution of a city, evolution of society. It has to change. Regent Park. I mean, it was kind of rough and tumble place and that sort of thing. Even I worked as a paramedic or back then it was called emergency medical assistant way back then. You went in there and you were always waiting for police to help you, to be with you and all that sort of thing. And I remember, after they started tearing it down, probably in the 2000s, they started tearing parts of it down and regentrifying it. And I remember going to the Cabbagetown Festival and driving and having to park on Sumac Street in the middle of Regent Park. And I get out of my car, and automatically, from my childhood, all my spidey senses go up.
Yeah.
You know, I'm thinking, well, who's behind me, who's in front of me, what's over here, what's over there, because it's Regent Park.
Yeah.
And I had to stop and laugh because here comes the lady with her foo-foo dog and her fur coat. Here comes this and here's that, and it was totally different. And I just had to look at myself and laugh because a lot of that, those old instincts kicked in, and for no real reason anymore. I mean, there's still some issues down there, of course, as there is everywhere. But it had changed so drastically, and my mind hadn't caught up to that because I don't get down there that often.
For anybody international listening, Toronto, they had a great idea. They looked at what was going on in the States in terms of ghettos, and they said, we're not going to let that happen in Toronto. We're going to build the community housing, the affordable housing, we're going to build it in little pockets all over the city. And this Regent Park is one of these pockets, or it was, and still is. There's still some community housing down there. But there's also multi-million-dollar condominiums. And it changes the communities, like Robin's saying.
Yeah, and I always thought it was funny when I would hear people when I'm down visiting. I still have some relatives down there. When I'd hear some of the neighborhood kind of saying, "Well, we're original Cabbage Towners, and they're in their $1 million house and all that sort of stuff," and I kind of think, no, you have no concept. Read the book Cabbage Town, and you'll get a sense of what that old 1940s, 50s thing. I mean, when they built Regent Park, it was actually a very modern thing. When they started tearing it down, there was a little booth that talked about how it's going to all change. And so I talked to the guy. I said, well, you're tearing this down. What's happening to the people? Da, 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 da. And he was just explaining as well, when they built that, I believe in the 50s, they tore down all the slums because it was all slum area back there. And it was quite a modern concept to have all this kind of modular kind of apartments and all that, and the streets all divided. And but that had passed its time. So from kind of a modern thing for the 50s and all that, well, yeah, you got lower economic income people moving in. You had different, and you had that kind of everybody's compacted in a small area, and then this, that, and the other thing. So yeah, absolutely, that's its concerns. But again, you had strong families. You had people being part of the community. You had all that. You had Cabbage Town Boxing Club. You had different activities there that the kids. You had way back then. You had Riverdale Zoo. Before the big zoo, they had Riverdale Zoo, and I remember as a wee little guy going down and seeing the bear and seeing that sort of stuff. Now it's Riverdale Farm, which is absolutely wonderful. So absolutely things have changed down there. When I worked with the ambulance service in Toronto, we go down into Regent or somewhere in places in Cabbage Town, and it was like, I don't feel very comfortable being here, on a Friday night, and there's a lot of drinking perhaps or whatever. There's a street party, whatever. But that's also part of that nature of ambulance work and emergency services. It changed where like Sumac Street or Sackville Avenue and all that. They wouldn't go right through Regent Park. The streets were broken. Oh. So if we got a call, say South Sackville, we'd come in off Gerard. If you didn't know, you'd get stuck in the middle because they had walkways and all that. So you'd have to come out and go all the way around the city or all the way around the block to get to the location of your call.
No GPS.
Yeah, I was going to say we take Google Maps for granted.
Oh, yeah.
Again, I'm sure most of the people listening are under the age of 30. Just the idea that you'd have to know directions and know your way around the streets, it's just probably a foreign concept to a lot of them.
I remember being amazed at MapQuest.
Yeah.
Oh, Google MapQuest, kids, if you need to see.
Yeah, we had these things called geocodes when I worked with the ambulance. It was big map books, right? You had to kind of coordinate where you were and trying to find out which way you're going, and nothing electrical, nothing digital. But yeah, anyway, so yeah, I grew up on Elm Street and then into Cabbage Town, and from there, I started, high school at Jarvis, and then De La Salle first, then Jarvis. But started martial arts training in Chinatown because we lived fairly close to Chinatown when we were on Elm Street. And a bunch of the neighborhood kids wanted to go practice Kung Fu because one of their uncles was Jack Chin, one of the Kung Fu guys in Chinatown.
This is a guy who's still deeply respected in the Chinese Toronto community.
Mm-hmm.
How old is he?
Still,
well, he's passed his
now.
yeah. It's still my merchants. This is a name I can say. People will remember.
And so a bunch of neighborhood kids went, and I was a little guy. I was like 8 years old, and so we all went, and eventually they all disappeared, but I ended up staying. So, a lot of my childhood was going to the Kung Fu Club 5 nights a week and just practicing, martial arts and old system of Kung Fu called Hung Kun or Hung Gar. And it was Jimmy Lor King Hong's Chinese name, and Jack Chin Fong is his Chinese name, who ran the club, and a bunch of teenage kids and a bunch of little kids. And so I learned some old traditional martial art, Chinese martial art, lion dancing, and people think it's dragon, but it's actually lion dancing.
Dragon boats, lion dancing people.
There you go. But the idea of being within that community was very comforting. I came from a fairly poor very, very poor background with lots of family issues and that sort of thing. So the Kung Fu Club was kind of my safe place, if you want to call it that.
So is the lion dancing just a thing people do for fun? Is it just a pastime, or is it this more serious?
Well, traditionally, it's a very serious thing. All the old Kung Fu clubs, even in China, even 17th, 18th century, they would also always have a lion dance troupe associated with them, because what they would do is go from village to village and raise money. So it's it's a big, huge costume they put on. They dance around, jump around.
Quite heavy.
And there's drumming and there's cymbals and all that sort of thing. And so they would go from village to village to raise money. It was a performing troupe.
Yeah.
So there's the martial aspect, and then there was the kind of performance aspect of it. And so you always had a lion dance team with your Kung Fu club. It was also a way, so the story goes, depending on how much mythology you want, where because of the political situation through the Qing dynasty and Ming dynasty and the overthrowing, that sort of thing, where they could actually pass messages and propaganda to the other villages on whatever side they were on, because they couldn't do it freely, because they'd have heads chopped off or something, I'm sure. So they would have to do it covertly, and that's one of the ways they did that, where they could pass notes to each other, or pamphlets to each other saying what's happening, and join our cause or whatever.
So these movements relate to the art.
Absolutely. All the martial, all the movement in the lion dance is based on martial art. So you'd see very strong stances. All the hand motions were basically the same as punching and blocking and striking. There were kicking involved with it. There were actually some lion dancers were expected to be kind of the enforcers, if you want, where the lions would actually fight if they came across another club. And so there were techniques you could do with this big kind of paper mache head that you could fight with the other lions, or and clear them out of the way if you're moving forward. So yeah, a very interesting part of my life, and that continues up to today. I mean, on Saturday we had a big banquet in Richmond Hill that was celebrating a partner Kung Fu Club's 50th anniversary. We had a big reunion of the old Toronto Jingmo Kung Fu Club, and it was also the establishment of the Greater Toronto Jingwu Association. If you go back far enough, not that far, let's say 1910 is the establishment of this group called Jingwu. Prior to that, there was martial arts was based on mythology and magic, and they can shoot you, and if you take my spells it won't hurt you, and blah blah blah, and a lot of mysticism and cult aspects to the martial arts. It was in 1910 Hu Yunjai founded the Qingwu Association, and that brought martial arts into more of a modern age, where they kind of wanted to dispel that mythology. Prior to that, the Chinese, because of colonialism, because of civil war, because of famines and environmental disasters, they were considered very weak, and physically they were, because they didn't have anything.
So what was going on in China at this time? Was this like Chiang Kai-shek, or is that prior to that?
That was
Okay.
the revolution with Sun Yat-sen,
Yeah.
the establishment of modern China, and I think it was 1911, somewhere around there. But prior to that, it was warlords that ran everything. I mean, there was major rebellions. There was a Boxer Rebellion in 1901. There was various other rebellions that were going on. And it was always the working class people and the farmers and all that, like in any war, that suffered the most. But their health was considerable, and that's where the term sick man of Asia came from. And the idea of the Qingwu Association was to dispel that and get rid of that and bring the population into a healthy, more physical and mental health status. And so the Qingwu organization was actually aimed to be more of a national consciousness, a growth of pride, a growth of physicality, a growth of martial ability. But it wasn't only martial arts; it was sports. It was they had Boy Scouts, they had tennis, they had all these other things, with the aim of bringing the health of the Chinese population up. If you look at the evolution of that from that Qingwu concept of national movement, came the Koshu with the nationalist government, kind of the Koshu martial art kind of thing that became a standard and a bar to be raised, and then right up to the the communist era where they have wushu, which is the same sort of thing. It's a national effort to bring martial art as a sport into health and that sort of thing. So it is an interesting history. When I was growing up in China, I didn't grow up in Chinatown, but was associated very closely with it. My main teacher, Jimmy Lor King Hong in Chinese, he coined the club Jigmo, which is Qingwu. Qingwu is actually an international organization, but we coined it. We're not part of that organization. We're close to it now that the Qingwu organization is now part of Greater Toronto. Martial arts background, being part of Toronto, being part of the communities of, say, Cabbagetown, being the community within Chinatown, being the community within the Kung Fu Club, certainly that's formed me to who I am. The idea of learning a fighting skill certainly came in handy. I won't say I've ever had to, beat somebody up or anything like that, but certainly it's allowed me to control situations. The sense of violence is actually very objectable to me, and working as an ambulance person, I've seen I call them, I used to call them the silver place medalists, right, or the second place medalists. Just to see what violence can do to the human body, and it was my profession as a paramedic instructor, teaching anatomy, physiology, and all that. Certainly, it opened my eyes to what violence is.
We see violence a lot represented in art, and real violence is very, very different from what you see represented in art. I guess gross. Even if you're a sociopath and you have no empathy for the other person, it's a disgusting thing for two people to do. Like the sounds, the wet thud, it's awful.
So in my 20s, somehow I ended up in Baltimore for 4 years, and it's where every American med student and nursing student wants to do some of their rotation. Part of that is because Johns Hopkins University and the University of Maryland are two top tier med schools, but the other part of it, they say they want quote unquote war zone experience working in the ERs in these places.
Yep. The concept of paramedicine, advanced ambulance work, actually came out of Baltimore.
Wow. That doesn't surprise me.
And that's actually what got me involved in paramedicine.
Right.
Was reading a book. What's his name? No period Adam something. Oh gosh, I can't remember his name of the.
Google it, guys. Put it in the comments.
Yeah, but I read his book called Shock Trauma when I was in University of Waterloo, and I did a seminar project on physiologic trauma to the body. Blah blah blah. I was in health studies at the time, and interviewed Doug Leonard, who was a coordinator at Humber College Ambulance and Emergency Care Program. So when I finished up at university, I said, I like that. And so, I went into the college. Then it was a 1-year program, worked with Toronto Ambulance, eventually shifted into teaching the paramedic program. And got involved in actually teaching self-defense for paramedics and writing a book on that topic and doing seminars to ambulance services. I worked with a lot of paramedics in a capacity as event security. There aren't that many places you can learn to be a paramedic in Ontario. A lot of the time, often, they would know Robin. They would remember him as a prof. And I would ask them, what'd you think? And they would say the most common refrain was, what he taught me was there when I needed it. That was the most common, the efficacy. So I just want to vouch and talk about how good your reputation is among the paramedic community in Toronto and various other places. So, thank you. It's and that's wonderful feedback because I don't get to hear a lot of what happens on the road unless I bump into them on the street and chit chat and that sort of thing. But you know, I'm glad for the work I did with the paramedics and the paramedic program at Humber first, and then eventually at Conestoga College in Kitchener, and continuing that idea of, you know, personal safety, situational awareness, very basic, you know, release holds or pushaways or anything like that. I didn't teach how to fight. You know, you can't fight, and
You don't want to fight a patient at the end
no,
of the day
no,
if you can help.
yeah. But you know, certainly the idea of protecting myself and protecting my patient as well, and basically escaping from a situation, you know, and for you know, paramedics especially, the idea of getting away to safety, calling in police or whoever, you know, they are the trained personnel to do anything else with that, but getting away.
And that parallels beautifully with bodyguard work.
Yep.
So exactly what you do is you get, doesn't, you know, again, you talk about things being represented in the movies a little different. Your job as a bodyguard, if trouble starts, is you grab your asset, you got your protecting, and you get them off the way quickly, into the car away as quickly as you can. And you got to always have a plan to do that. Anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, and certainly we see that what's happened recently in the States a couple of times.
Yeah, there's been some security failures.
Yeah, yeah. So, you know, you go back to, you know, if we want to talk a little bit about the Chinese and Chinatown and how martial art plays into that. You know, the first Chinese came to Canada in the 1770s, about 50 and 100 or somewhere around there, and basically contract labor. Gold rush in 1858 drew a lot of Chinese from California into the Fraser Canyon for the gold rush in Canada. Then you end up with the building of the railroads from 1880 to 1885. You had about 17,000 Chinese workers, either some from the States, but then they started recruiting from China, mainly southern Guangdong, China, and Toisan area, Huiping areas. You had about 700 deaths that occurred on the railway, most of them undocumented, most of them due to the dangerous situations they were put in, some malnutrition, some suicide, you know, and, you know, it was interesting. I just learned recently that a lot of the connections of Chinese, the ally was actually First Nations.
Really?
Yeah, First Nations. So because I don't know exact history, but some people telling me this. I was reading a bit about it. The idea that, well, some of the people, you know, they had nothing to bury. They had co-workers and all that, but it was the First Nations that took them and buried them, gave them some dignity in death and that sort of thing, you know. So there was, and even actually when I was in Victoria, I talked a little bit about that in the Chinese Canadian museums. About how there are actually intermarriages and that sort of thing, and families have been brought up with both cultures, which was very interesting. I don't know too much about that, and I know a little bit more, but I'm sure it's a fascinating topic, you know, to go into.
Well, our native peoples, they came mostly from Siberia, my understanding. So you have that Asian connection,
Yeah.
you know. A lot of times in Toronto, you'll see First Nations person, and you'll think for a second, wait, are they East Asian, or are they First Nations? You know, it's anyway. Is it just, you know, how much the genetic similarities and our shared stories, humans, and interested? I just wanted to bring that anyway. So
Yeah. So, you know, from immigration for the railway from 1880 to 1885, built the railway in Canada, and then what happens? Well, the railway's finished. Thank you very much. You take a big photograph with not a Chinese worker in it. A lot of kind of British people with top hats and that sort of thing. And then what happens to this population? You know, they start to migrate east, and so they got basic skills that they can't use. You know, they got labor skills, but they got cooking skills. They got, you know, and trying to avoid stereotypical kind of things. But the employment they got were in restaurants and laundries and those sorts of things. And so from there they migrate east. There's a whole, I forget the name of a book, but it follows the path of Chinese restaurants throughout Canada, and
very interesting story.
Oh yeah, all kind of relating back to, well, the Chinese that came and helped build the railroads.
Well, also for those of our viewers who are not in Canada, I'm from Western Canada. Western Canada and Eastern Canada might as well be two different countries. The only thing we have in this country that resembles a national culture basically comes out of this railroad being built.
Yeah, very important linkway.
Yeah.
This is like our going to the moon, basically.
Well, I mean, how many of our like folk singers wrote a song about building the railroad or taking the railroad to do some labor out west or come back out east after it's finished.
Well, the whole idea of confederation,
Yeah.
the joining of Canada was based on the completion of that railway.
Yes.
And the completion of that railway was dependent on getting workers.
Yep.
And the idea of getting workers, well, we can only get so much immigration, Irish and whoever else, but it said, how do we need more workers that are willing to work. So they imported, quote unquote, Chinese, okay, for half the price,
Yep.
and they had to pay for all their own stuff, pay for their own food. They lived in tents where the other people would live in at the railway stations or in railway yards and that sort of thing. So a lot of strife, a lot of hard work and that sort of thing that was not recognized at the time, or not recognized for a long time after that too. So you had that. You had the head tax. $50 in 1855 to $100 in 1900 to $500 in 1903. They were the only immigrant population to be taxed to be able to come to Canada, and those figures, I forget what the actual exchange is now, but it's like tens of thousands of dollars, $500.
The head tax, for anybody who doesn't know, is they bring these workers over, and then these people were trying to work and save money to bring their families over, and then the government would throw up a tariff basically on bringing your wife and kids and whoever to come live with you.
Well, and the thing is, they couldn't bring their wife and kids.
Yeah.
It was because it was for labor. It was males, and to the point in 1923 they had the Chinese Exclusion Act, which forbade any more Chinese to come in, and certainly forbade any of the families to come in. So you had this population in Canada, primarily Western Canada, and as they moved east, of a bachelor society. So because they couldn't bring their people in. Okay, there were very few exemptions where they could actually bring people in under this time, so you had this large bachelor society. You had then you had the marriage of Chinese and Canadians and those sorts of things. So you got family here, and a lot of Chinese had family here as well as family back in China. Okay, so there was that dynamic as well. Exclusion Act went from 1923 to 1947 when it was repealed. And even then there was still a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment with the Korean War. Okay, so you had these enclaves of Chinese that stuck in a certain area, Toronto or Vancouver or Victoria or Montreal, and those became the Chinatowns.
So the reaction to the backlash from the wars and the racism.
Yeah, that's the commonality. I'd rather be with my people here than have to deal with some of the stuff that was going on. That's my take on it anyway.
Humans are very tribal. We kind of gravitate to
Another funny
other
thing.
people.
The first minimum wage laws in Canada, it was more Japanese than Chinese, but it was still general. What do they call it? Yellow fear or whatever they called it.
Try explaining that there are different types of East Asians to like a lot of people now.
Yeah.
You'll get blank looks in a lot of parts of the world. So I can only imagine.
Yeah, but that's we like to think of minimum wage laws as being something chivalrous or charitable, but no, it was because the Asian immigrants were working for too cheap. Again, as I understand it, it was more anti-Japanese than anti-Chinese, but I'm sure that was part of the equation as
certainly.
well.
Certainly do an episode on what happened to the Japanese population in the West Coast during the Second World War. That's a phenomenally tragic part of Canadian history. World War II comes along. That's when you start to have the Chinese starting to push back against the government and say, "Well, hang on, we're Canadian. A lot of us are born here. Why can't we join the army? Why can't we join the military and fight for the country that won't recognize it, but we'll fight for you anyway, right?" So you had a barrier where Chinese couldn't join the military, and then they said, maybe we do need some people, so they'd start to let them in. One of the biggest things was a group towards the end of the war where Chinese out of mostly Vancouver, I think Montreal, and that became a commando unit, and I didn't know this. It was called. They were part of the Special Operations Executive under the British Command, and it was called Force 136. And there was a gentleman in Toronto, Chinatown. He ran a pharmacy, Tom Locke, very, very well known in the Chinese community. very, if I recall, like as a child, my mom, my mom was one of his customers and that, and so we'd go in, I'd look at the comic books and whatever. Very nice man, he's soft-spoken, if I recall correctly, very soft-spoken, very gentle. He was part of this thing, so he had learned the commando techniques on killing and soft killing and shooting and all this sort of stuff. And him and I forget the exact amount of people that were, they were, because the Pacific Theater, that we as in the Western military powers, didn't have people in there. So the idea is, well, let's create a force, parachute them in. They look the same, they speak the language, and so they could do the sabotage and they could do the assassination, all that kind of stuff. The recon, absolutely. So, the war ended just as they were getting set to go. They ended up in Burma and a couple of other places to handle the prisoners, the former POWs, Western POWs, to bring them home and that sort of thing. And I think one or two were actually active. So, after that, there is an aspect of, well, we did this for Canada, right? Listen to us. We want to be Canadians. And it was one of the members of that force that became the spokesman and eventually entered politics and was instrumental in forcing the government or changing the laws where the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed in 1947. So, and you also had people like Gene Lum in Toronto that was also part of that. And you had the community coming together and saying, listen, we are Canadian. We would like the same rights. We would like to vote. We're part of this community of Canada. We were Chinese, but we were Canadian. Let us be Canadian. And so after the war, that became the movement. But again, the Korean War, you had that anti-Asian sentiment again, and for various reasons, it still goes on. Recently and even up to today, there's still that anti-Asian sentiment, somewhat as a result of incorrect information about COVID and everything else, and that caused a lot of concern and caused a lot of sad things. So you have that background of the Chinese, then you have the migration east and then the settlements of Chinatowns, and then you have the prosperity. I mean, entering business, and being part of the economy and doing a lot of work in there.
I work with a lot of Chinese merchants and wholesalers, unbelievably hardworking people. That's the one thing I'd say is, if I can generalize about a group, I'd say they are unbelievably hardworking, productive people. It's just amazing to see. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my own experience within the Chinese community, it's certainly been a blessing. My sifu means teacher, my kung fu teacher, Jimmy Lor and Jack Chin, kind of took me under their wing. And certainly I got to experience a lot of the Chinese culture, be it from a banquet to the lion dances and the cultural coding that happens within those environments. I was very privileged to be at least be able to witness that, although I may not have understood it all the time. Be able to be part of that and have the guidance of my teachers to kind of work me through some things. So, for example, in lion dancing, there's specific things you have to do. So you've got the big mask on and you're dancing. If say you're collecting lucky money at a store, which is part of the festivities, there's specific things that you had to do and specific things you could not do. If you do the things you do, the correct way to do it, you get, yay, that's good. Good lion dancing, good kung fu, your teacher's a good guy. If you did something wrong, it was like you don't know what you're doing. But the sad thing, or the difficulty is, if you did something wrong, your sifu, your teacher, would lose face. Mm. Face being your reputation and your status, and so my teachers were very, very careful with teaching us the correct way. And I can recall making an error doing this thing, and my teacher Jimmy Laura saying, "No, you go back there and you do it right." So I do this. I'll go back and do it right, and you get the thumbs up from the merchant or whatever you're doing. So it was quite amazing. The the idea of learning that stuff and being involved with that stuff, and now passing those skills and that information along to the teams that I'm presently teaching lion dancing to, and Waterloo, at Waterloo Kung Fu Academy, or at Talek Martial Arts in Kingston, trying to get them to appreciate that culture several generations removed, if you want, and doing things correctly, so the elder Chinese that are used to seeing this stuff maybe back in Hong Kong or whatever can say, yeah, they know their stuff, you know. So, yeah.
Nice to see these connections all over the world.
Mhm.
I certainly see it with my family. Like I go to just about any city in the world, I got family now, thanks to marrying into a big Indian clan. And it's interesting to see those connections through the martial arts, that same kind of community, that same kind of, cultural sameness, that just, seeing the same thing.
Absolutely, and it is in every culture. You know, we're talking, more specifically about my experiences within the Chinese culture, but absolutely, I mean, any culture that has come from away and ended up here for whatever reasons, and a lot of commonalities of that, strife in the home country, war, whatever. They're coming to Canada, coming to different places. They're bringing those cultures, they're bringing that richness here, and it's very important for, us Canadians who are, white bread Canadians to recognize that and really appreciate it.
On that note, though, you mentioned Hong Kong there. Would you say that the Chinese community from Hong Kong is very different from mainland China, or would you say not so much?
I would. It's probably changing now because it's all under one Chinese flag. But absolutely, the influences of the British, the influences as a British colony, certainly still has its effect. As time goes on and the new generations of Chinese coming up will be probably more under the mainland influence, which is, the mainland culture, I should say, not good or bad or otherwise, it is what it is. And so you'll probably see more of the disillusion of that British influence.
I was changing planes in Hong Kong one time. I was looking out the window, a beautiful big window overlooking the bridge that they built to connect the mainland and the island. And they had these music students come in and play classical music for everybody, just as a little while you're waiting for your, they'd come and do a set, they'd move down, neat. It's a really good place. I ask a lot of people, is one of my questions that I'd ask people to get them to open up, is what's your favorite place you've ever been in your travels? And the most common answer by far is Hong Kong. We're talking like 50%. They say it's just like one guy described it as what's that movie from the dark, the dark future, and everything's built up and there's
that's a lot of movies from the 80s.
I'm just silly.
No, sorry, I'm not sure what you mean.
But it was they're trying to get the androids.
Oh, Blade Runner?
Blade Runner.
Oh,
I was
classic,
described as like
absolutely
Blade Runner.
classic. Yeah.
And my big connection to Hong Kong is that's where the Bloodsport was set. Now the actual story that Frank Dukes likes to tell was set in Nassau, but the movie that I love was set in Hong Kong, and that arguably inspired the UFC. Like, you don't think I remember sitting
Is that
around.
Jean-Claude? Yeah. But you asked a question earlier about, what's the difference between real martial art and movie martial art? It's like night and day. If we could fight like Jackie Chan fought in his movies, or Bruce Lee fought in his movies, or Jet Li, it would be amazing. But that's not the reality, right?
And again, for our listeners under the age of 30, Jean-Claude Van Damme was a ballet dancer.
Yeah, you got to look. You got to make the movements fluid, and you got to make dancing. You'd be amazed how many martial artists are dancers.
Yeah.
Bruce Lee did dancing. Anderson Silva is a dancer. He does like
Michelle
dancing
Yeoh.
on all these guys.
Yep.
And you'd be amazed, guys, how many dancers can fight. Elvis Stoico is apparently a very tough guy. I've heard that again and again.
And unfortunately, I think a lot of especially younger martial artists, have never been in a fight or never been in that kind of tense situation. They fool themselves by practicing martial art and thinking they can fight. We do lots of choreographed movements, forms, or in Japanese they're called katas, where you do a bunch of punching and kicking in a choreography. Choreography is great fitness, it's great to coordinate, it's great to get that mental mindset, it's great to practice techniques, but it's not fighting.
It won't teach you timing.
It won't teach you timing, it won't teach you when the person isn't in the right position, the person's too far away, the person's faster than you, or they're not predictable like they are in the movies.
And how to deal with an adrenaline dump.
Yeah, well, I was
That
going to
the
say,
biggest
you know,
thing that
you can't learn your fight or flight reaction from a book, no matter how hard you study.
Absolutely.
I want to say I am so lucky. I know, dear listener, that you cannot see me, but I am not. Had I studied Northern Kung Fu, I would have been at a big disadvantage. I'm very happy and I'm very lucky that I studied Southern Kung Fu. Basically, what we tend to see in movies is more the Northern variant, and this is the jump kicking, the diving around, the more acrobatic stuff. Southern Kung Fu tends to focus on a good, strong horse stance. Low kicks, you know, I don't, you know, it's more applicable to my body type. If you saw me, that.
Yeah, if you wanted to, you can Google, wushu, which is the Chinese national sport of martial art, and they're phenomenal. I could not do anything they do, versus say Choi Lei Foot or Honga, where it's, even Wing Chun, where it's very ground-based and very hand-oriented, where you're punching, moving a lot of hand work, and again, low kicking, strong movement, circular motion, that sort of thing. But yeah, there's definite differences. And you know, I tell my students that, you know, people who practice forms, there's kind of three parts, I think. There's the forms, the choreographed, there's the self-defense, and there's the fitness. And there's probably more, but I'll use those three for example. Because you're excellent at doing forms, choreographed movements, does not mean you can fight. Because you can be in super physical condition, does not mean you can fight. You can fight because you fight. Yeah. An old friend of mine told me, you know, he goes, it's easy to teach people how to fight. Just tell them to go into a biker bar and spit in somebody's face. Yeah. You know,
Yeah.
You'll learn real fast to fight, you know.
But I mean, they say if you want to learn a language, the best way to do it is go to the country and start hitting on women at the bar. You know, it's
Another way to do it.
We'll call it a immersion.
Yeah.
When I did security very short for a couple of years off and on when I was in university in Cambridge, there was a bar there, and there's a couple of judo guys, mostly football players, and you know, everyone wants to get into a fight at that point. I really didn't. I was just after the money and you know, trying to get through university. But the only time I got into a situation where I actually intentionally tried to hit someone, somebody jumped on, it was a kind of bar, you know, a bar clear, everybody was fighting. And so I stayed back, and because people were jumping on the back of the bouncers, so I jumped on them and tossed them back into the crowd. So as one guy jumped onto the back of the bouncer, I grabbed him and spun him around and went to kick him, like intentionally meant to do damage to this person. He was so drunk he just kind of fell away, and I missed. And I stood there in all this mayhem and, you know, confusion and chaos of people fighting all over, going, you know, at that time, 25 years of Kung Fu, and I missed, you know. And then you get back into doing whatever. But I just remember that. I just sit there astonished with myself, saying, after 25 years Kung Fu, and I go to hit somebody, I missed them. But you know, it's good that I didn't. I'm not interested in hurting people and all that, but it was an interesting time, right? You know? Yeah.
You learn a lot about people bouncing. You learn a lot about yourself bouncing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing that kept me coming back, looking back on it, was again, community. When you are working with a group of bouncers, be it a security company, be it a crew at a bar, you have that hunting pack, you have that tribe. And it doesn't matter where they're from, it doesn't matter their background. Because of the nature of the work, you end up, you know, very, very close to these people that you're working with. Mm-hmm. And learning a lot about them, and it's been interesting. Like, I think about looking back on the people I befriended. I have a buddy, Amadou, who's currently back in the Ivory Coast. Basically, he was a bouncer during the weekend, and he was a landscaper for University of Toronto. And he finally got his pension because he's much older than he looked. He never found it exactly his age, but he was like...
You're assuming it was documented because it frequently is.
Well, this is, you know, in the Ivory Coast. He has I want to, again, at some point, I'll tell Amadou's life story of him coming up in the Ivory Coast, somehow getting to Canada, and then getting this small pension from U of T because he did the landscaping, and he got a small settlement because he got frostbite. At one point, and they weren't taking him seriously, and he came because his English is, guy speaks 5 languages, but his English is, you know, not his first language. And they wouldn't take him seriously, and he goes, Jeremy, you gonna help me write this letter to these guys? And I know, unfortunately, if you bounce, you deal with lawyers and lawsuits sooner or later. So I knew the language to use, I knew, what to say, and then after that letter, they took him much more seriously. You got a much better settlement offer. But that was enough that he was able to retire back to the Ivory Coast, and he's like the richest guy in his village now, raising his own chickens. He's got a pecan plantation somewhere.
Again, for those of you who are teenagers listening, if you can speak articulately, you're the person who the cops are going to believe, and that comes in handy if something starts at a bar.
What was the best is he spoke African French. So if I ever had francophones in the bar giving trouble or at the gate, I'd call him and he'd speak this French. And it would take them a minute to figure out the accent, because he speaks very beautiful French. And then they just realize, and they just, okay. Oh, you're Côte d'Ivoire. Oh, okay. Good night. Abiento, monsieur. So there's always just a learning curve, this kind of stuff. But
yeah, the idea of the security in the bars and that sort of thing, I know it's changed quite a bit because, well, now you have to be a security guard, and there's lots more liability surrounding it. I mean, way back when it was people got into bounce because they wanted to fight.
Yep.
And sadly, it's led to a lot of injury and sometimes even death as a result of over exuberant bouncer.
What I'd always tell the exuberant guys, the kids that were there to prove themselves, is, buddy, if you want to prove that you're tough, go down to a martial arts gym and fight trained sober people. That's how you can prove you're tough. If you're you can make a living if you're good enough at it.
Yeah.
But if you want to come down here and bully drunks, what are you doing?
It's a challenge.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can think of the number of fights I was in was a lot. The number of people who were actually trained to fight me back or any good at fighting back was very small. It's a tiny percentage of the population that's, knows how to hurt somebody with their hands, basically, and feed.
And I remember there's a book, Robert W. Smith, he wrote Martial Musing, and a really good book if you want to read a kind of a person's overview of martial arts and its histories around in the 60s and 70s. He wrote books on martial arts. He was one of the people that went around to places in Taiwan and trained with people and wrote about what he had learned. But he was talking about MMA and talking about violence and that sort of stuff. And a quote that I always really enjoyed, and I repeat it because it hit me hard, was why would someone want to hurt another person? And I was like, because if you think you know how to fight and you're in martial arts because you think you're a good fighter, just think of that. I mean, martial arts will train you what to do, but it won't train you how to respond to what you've done or what you did. And you talk about the psychological impact of violence on the victims. Absolutely. I mean, it's stress, there's PTSD, depression, all kinds of stuff. But people don't realize if you are, unless you're a fighter with no consciousness, no sense of humanity, you beat somebody up and you're fine, you go on and have your beer.
Also known as a psychopath.
Well, they say now in psych, it's now the dark triad traits or cluster B traits is the polite way of saying.
But if you're one of those persons, you don't care if you hurt another person. But people who think they're like that, and I've had this a few times, where someone has gotten into a fight and was totally in the right to defend himself, punched somebody in the face, knocked them out, knocked teeth out, whatever. And then they realize, oh my God, I just hurt that person. And even though they're in the right, and all self-defense wise are in the right, they felt horrible. Because most of us are not conditioned to that, to deal with that aspect. The idea of, I went to a conference once and there was a tactical police officer who had to shoot somebody and went through depression and suicidal and everything else and came out the other end. But he said, they train you right up to the point of pulling the trigger, but then they don't train. They don't train you about the consequences, psychological consequences. And I think, as martial artists, we have to consider that as well. And typically people get into martial arts because they want to learn how to fight. If it's a good club and a conscientious club, that changes over time. Yeah. So this is beautiful art. This is what I can do. Yeah, there's self-defense aspects, but I can demonstrate. I can help other people.
Community,
it calms me down.
Teaching, all the things.
So the idea of hurting someone becomes way down on the list. Hopefully, you have the skills if it happens, but at the same time, it's way down on the list of why you do this stuff.
Well, so you mentioned Cabbagetown with the boxing gyms. Would you say that the ethos and the culture of a boxing club is similar to this?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not a boxer.
Yeah, I'm just curious.
But the idea of boxing is that combative sport in an arena. Okay, I would not want to fight a boxer. They're masters with their hands. But the idea of absolutely, they're not fighting. They're not boxing because they want to. Usually, they're not boxing because they want to be fighters. They're boxing because they want to box. They want to get in the ring and move it around and test themselves and test their opponents, and So yeah, the attitude is different in most cases, I would say. In martial arts, the idea of there's ample opportunity. You can go into range, you can compete, you can bring it up to the nth level. If you want to go into MMA, it's a little harsher, a little more realistic. The punches are landing hard. Yeah. So there's that aspect of it, but most of us don't really want that aspect, For myself, I did not compete in the martial arts. I did a lot of sparring, did a lot of moving around with people and all that, but I didn't necessarily need that medal or that trophy. And my teachers were never for that, and so I never got into that. I used to wrestle and get trophies there, but I wasn't really interested in the martial arts.
The beauty of wrestling, it's like the striking versus grappling. It's like the hunters versus the fishermen. Mm-hmm. If you're a grappler, you can let them go. Mm-hmm. It's a little harder. But I want to talk just psychologically a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
It's things that people might not realize. Just touch on to elaborate your point a little bit. Most species, especially a social species like us, we seem to be hardwired not to kill each other. Mm-hmm. If you'll notice, two guys fight, the first thing they do isn't bite the guy's throat. Yeah. They're going to have usually two untrained guys. They're going to swing just like a chimp. They're going to swing, do a big overhand right at each other. One guy might knock the other guy down. Fight's done. You've made your point because it's about status. It's not really about hurting the other person.
It's about impressing any females that might happen to be watching as well.
Well, we're ranked. We're hierarchical in terms of our breeding. So you've got, again, I think this is my theory, is that's why everybody turns and watches a fight. Yeah. Because this is now going to potentially affect the rank of our tribe.
Well, they've done studies. It's a completely different part of the brain that's activated if, again, somebody's a psychopath and follows somebody down a dark alley where nobody's watching because there's no status involved there.
You just made a decision to hurt you or hurt that person. I worked with some dark triad guys. I worked for a dark triad guy, unfortunately. Now, this is great because anytime I had a test on a psychopathy or what we will call psychopathy just for shorthand, I was just able to think of this guy. Mm-hmm. And it was great. What would he? Oh, okay, yeah, I could answer. I read the Wikipedia on the Dark Triad, and it was like they were describing him, like he was the type specimen. And this was a guy he would hurt people and not care. And it's just most people are not like that. We're hardwired to not kill each other because we're pack hunters. We're at the end of the day we evolved to live in tribes, and we needed each other in these tribes to survive. Mm-hmm. Can't bring down a woolly mammoth on your own or whatever game you're hunting, you're gonna be a lot less effective on your own. So if you have, so that's just something to think about. It's something to consider if you want to join the army, if you want to be a cop, if you want to do something where maybe you're gonna have to hurt somebody at some point.
Yeah, and that is a thing. And there's a book by David Grossman, I believe his name is. He wrote two very, very good books that I read. One is On Killing. The other is On Combat. Mm-hmm. And the idea is, well, how do you take a 18-year-old kid from Iowa and turn him into a killer, right? The psychological training, the permission, the order, the training, all that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of stuff that will influence this person to be able to aim at somebody, pull a trigger.
They had a big problem in the world wars. People were aiming high.
That's what I was going to bring up. That's
sorry. I'll lead you in.
Stealing my thunder.
No, sorry.
I'm out of here. But absolutely, they in World War II and that they would intentionally miss, just because of perhaps the idea that, well, even though I'm trained to do this, it's hard for me to actually kill another person.
Am I going to go back to the farm with a body on my rigged gun?
Yes, and sadly that is something that's happened in every war that you think of, But yeah, the psychological aspect of violence or the psychological aspects of self-defense. I was reading an article about in the States, stand your ground kind of stuff, where somebody walks in your house, bang, you shoot them, and but one guy who did it, the guy actually came into his house. I get the basic story right. Came into his house swinging and that sort of thing. He had a weapon and all that sort of. So the homeowner pulled out a gun and shot him, killed him. Right. Police came, self-defense, no problem. Right. And this guy went through massive depression, and because he was a conscientious person, he was a human, and ended up having to sue the family of the dead person to help pay for his medical expenses. Wow. Because he was, PTSD and all that other stuff, and he couldn't work anymore and that sort of thing. For me, that illustrated the idea that, you can be trained up to a point to do something. Once you do that thing, you're not trained how to deal with it. And I think in martial art clubs, the training is mostly about the fight. You spar, you're in the fight. They don't teach you how to avoid the fight. They don't teach you the consequences of a fight. They don't teach you, escalation model. They don't teach you de-escalation model. If somebody punches, you block and you hit them. Then you kick them, then you punch them, then you elbow them, and get them on the ground and pound them for a while. But there's so much more to it. And when I train, even I talk to my martial arts students, or when I train with paramedics and all that, I'd always talk about that aspect of, what happened before it got to that point? Yeah. Did you notice it from 20 feet away? When did the fight actually start? And I also talk about the in any type of combative situation, be it two insects, two armies, two robot armies, it doesn't matter. There's always going to be a point of recognition that that's a target, the approach to the target, the defeating the defensive, and finishing movement. Okay, it's probably all kinds of subcategories under that, but in any kind of confrontation, that's what it is. If I don't see you, you don't see me, there's no confrontation. If I see you, you see me. You want to attack me, you have to notice me, you assess along the way, you break that distance, you break down my guard, and then you do some kind of finishing thing, whatever it is. But people don't understand that you can stop the fight anytime before it becomes physical. And I've done that. I mean, you've probably done it as a bouncer too. Somebody looks at you, go, "Hey, how you doing?" Yep. Oh yeah, no problem, man, no problem. I once got into a situation in a bar years ago, and I told this to my martial arts students, where I was in a bar. I turned around with a beer in my got a beer, turned around and knocked somebody's beer out of the hand. And it's one of these where I have to look up to him because the guy was huge, and he starts to do one of these where he gets real big, right? And I said, "Hey man, sorry, here, take mine, it's new." Right? I just got this beer. He goes, "No, that's okay. You're too nice a guy." It worked, totally an intuitive type of thing. Excuse me, but it avoided a confrontation. Am I going to fight over a beer? No.
It takes a level of security to be able to be friendly in those situations. Mm-hmm. I think one of the reasons that had I ended up in a Cobra Kai style training, and I had somebody modeling aggression, modeling anger, but when I'm very, very lucky. I had a lot of good role models. You're one of them.
Thank you.
And you were able to model strength in a way that didn't have aggression. Mm. You could show the kindness can be strength. That's that kind of stuff. Mm. So that's one of the things. But humans, when they get into a fight, it's like a different part of their brain takes over, especially for men. Yep. And if you can get them to use another part of their brain, it can shock them out of it, just like Robin's saying. Mm-hmm. The number of times when just disarming them, friendliness. Like I'd always say, like my friendliness, my gentleness was my greatest asset as a doorman. And I was lucky because I did kung fu, but I also was a wrestler, and that puts me in a situation where I didn't have to hit the guy, unless it was absolutely necessary. And also, I'm in a position now where in a grapple I can talk.
Yes.
Buddy, come on, what are we doing? This is you want to go out after this? Come on, we're rolling around. Let's talk.
Yeah.
Well, we were talking about Baltimore earlier, and I, being from the suburbs, didn't know what to expect when I moved to a place like that. Am I going to be in danger here? Just the first or second day there, somebody told me, look, yes, it's a high crime city. Yes, it's a city with a huge murder rate. But if you're ever lost, just don't look like you're lost. Just puff out your chest and walk confidently, and nobody will say a word to you. And you're gonna live there for 4 years. I don't think I ever got confronted by anybody on the street.
A predator wants a weak prey.
Yeah.
Predator wants somebody that's going to be, you know, the wolf doesn't go after the healthy
Yeah.
buck. The wolf goes after the old sick.
Well, that's just, they said, the one cardinal rule is just never look like you're lost. Even if you are lost, just walk confidently. You'll eventually get to a lit street, and then you'll be able to figure out what to do next. But just never look like you're lost, and nobody will say a
Oh,
word
yeah,
to you.
one of the things I talk about, I talk to my paramedic students, I talk to self-defense things in my Kung Fu classes, is that predator prey. You know, if there's a predator there, they'll always look for the weaker prey. You know, if that's totally psychotic, right?
Yeah.
But if there's a predator, they'll look for the weaker prey. If they recognize that weaker prey, those are the ones they're going to pick. If they notice a stronger person, they probably won't address that or attack that.
Yeah.
You know, and just the idea of understanding that very, very primitive nature of animalistic behavior is very important when it comes to survival in the street, or self-defense, or martial art, or whatever the case is. You know, and it can bounce around. When am I predator? When am I prey?
Yeah.
You know, and
There's always a bigger fish, as they say.
yeah,
It's-
absolutely. And again, going back to, you know, how some martial artists train, they don't realize that. They always think they're the big fish
Yeah.
until they're not. You know. And the idea of winning a fight, quote unquote, or losing a fight, quote unquote, it really doesn't matter. You know, some police officer friends have been in lots of physical things, both on either end of it. You know, psychologically they could handle it. You know, because, well, it's just a thing, right? And I've also had police officer friends or other friends that have gotten into really serious situations, and it has really affected them psychologically, you know? So, you know, the primitive brain takes over, and we go into that animalistic thing, but then that primitive brain, that lizard brain leaves, and we come back to the conscious person. You know, that's what changed it. That's why we're different from the lion or the tiger and all that sort of stuff. They don't come back. They don't have that consciousness and that, you know, that higher intellect, if you want to call it. They stay that predator, right? Where we can do that, but we have to bounce back to reality too. For the most part. I mean, there's exceptions to that, and I've met many of them. But understanding the nature of predator-prey is very important when you're dealing with self-defense, or when you're dealing with combatives and that sort of thing.
This is interesting in terms of evolutionary psychology
Mhm.
because we didn't evolve as top predator.
Yeah.
We evolved as mid predator.
Yeah,
So
smart
we
predators.
had so we had to worry about the guys above us eating us. We had to worry about eating the guys below us. So that's why we have this rich. One of the reasons we evolved this really rich, all these psychological mechanisms. And we don't, you know, we're not like the hammerhead shark or something that doesn't, you know, kills and doesn't consider.
So to take things somewhat full circle, because you said, you know, snapping back into reality, when did the popular perception of martial arts go from Bruce Lee to being the UFC?
Oh gosh.
How did that happen?
With the Gracie brothers, who kind of founded the whole concept of UFC, of MMA, and that sort of thing, and they brought it to international attention. I mean, the stuff's always there.
Yeah.
The practice is what made it different.
The laws of physics don't change, right?
No, exactly. You know, the
was-
techniques are all the same. It's how they're applied and how they're practiced and how they prepare for the fight. You know?
To be again, like you probably, if you're listening to this, you grew up in a post 2005 UFC boom kind of world. To see a skinny Brazilian guy go through all these huge muscle boxers and do it in a way where he didn't really have to hit them, just was a sea change. But really, in terms of I think when it supplanted in the popular culture was the Ultimate Fighter. They had that reality show,
Okay.
and it's like surfing. It's like goes back to the movies Gidget. It's
Yeah.
amazing. So once again, you talk about Scottish history, Braveheart, covered the pursuit in that episode. It's just amazing how much that. But in terms of like, you know, martial arts magazines, the community interested in that, yeah, the Gracies, absolutely. That's when I came up, and it was very interesting to learn.
You know, the martial arts have brought me to various places in my life. I mean, travel became part of it. I've been to Hong Kong and Guangzhou and China, and actually had the opportunity to demonstrate martial art there. You know, and practice at the original Qingwu school is over there, and meet some of the really cool masters over there. And you know, I never trained in China. You know, I played in China, but understanding that, well, you know, kind of bringing it back home, quote unquote, and being able to practice martial art and demonstrate martial art in China. And for a lot of them to say, wow, your Kung Fu is really good, like in the movies. It was a wonderful statement to describe my own training and a compliment to my teachers. We're all just kind of that intermediary between the people that trained us, what we passed along. And it was a wonderful feeling to get those compliments for me as the martial artist, but also to understand that, well, that is because of, earlier, my teacher, Jimmy Lure, or Jack Chin, or whatever. But the traveling aspect has been great. When I travel, I always I Facebook. Well, I'll be when I went to Thailand when I retired. I said, well, I'm on lion dance Facebook things. I said, well, I'll be in Thailand these dates. Anybody around? Oh no, sorry, I'm out of town. No, sorry, the school's closed. Well, yeah, when you're in Bangkok, call me. And so I met the gentleman. He brought me to his school. He introduced me to his teachers. He brought me out for dinner. He introduced me to his family. Absolutely wonderful experience. When I went down to New York, I contacted some martial art friends there. And at one point I had never met them. I met them on Facebook or chit-chatted and that sort of thing. Found some common people. Was able to go down there and be treated very, very well. And talk about martial arts, and no sense of challenge, no sense of I'm bigger than you, nothing like that. Just pure camaraderie. Really, really nice. So whenever I travel now, I kind of look up martial arts schools or contact. I'll be going to Germany next month, and contacted somebody I met in Hong Kong for about 10 minutes and just exchange that information. And he's in Munich. I'll be in Munich. So he said, well, yeah, give me a call when you're in. So just that expanding of the network. I look at martial arts as a connection of friends. It absolutely can be competitive. That's a totally different side. But the idea that, well, you practice this stuff, I practice this stuff, and it doesn't matter if it's a medieval European martial arts stuff, right? It doesn't matter, because we all have this kind of thing that we're training. And it's kind of good to meet other people and to get a sense of their experiences, my experiences. Even traveling when I do the volunteering with Global Medic, there's aspects of the martial arts that kind of comes into that. Be it meeting people that are fellow martial artists or martial artists, or the skills that I learned through martial arts when I have to keep my eyes open around the place. It's all part of it.
Tell us a little bit about Paramedics Without Borders.
Well, it's not Paramedics Without Borders. It's called Global Medic.
Global Medic. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Amazing organization.
Yeah. It started there in 2008, and it's an international organization that deals in humanitarian work, humanitarian aid, disaster relief. And so I've been to about 13 different missions from everywhere from. Started off Cambodia, Angola, Philippines, Haiti, Nepal, for an earthquake, Philippines for a major typhoon, been to Caribbean, I've been to Europe, in Romania and Ukraine, Moldova, Morocco. Those are my last trips. I'll probably be going to Armenia or somewhere around there in November when I get back from Germany. It's a great, I initially joined to continue to practice paramedicine in the field. I have yet to do any major paramedicine stuff besides stop at a car accident or something. It's all delivery of food to displaced populations. It's filtration of water so they can get clean water to avoid diseases like cholera. Sometimes it's delivering clothing. A lot of food stuff, a lot of that type of thing. There's a sheltering branch to the organization right now. Even locally, they're doing packing food for food banks, which is such a sad thing to have to say that in this country we have food banks.
It's such a rich society.
Yeah, we literally get 100-pound bags of rice, break them down into 500-gram packages, put them all in boxes, and bring them to food banks or shelters. We're also involved in the wildfires that are going on, say in Jasper, or even now in just there's a call out for places like Brazil and Central America or South America and different places for the fires out there, and so we're looking at getting equipment out there. in Canada getting firefighting equipment out, or internationally getting firefighting equipment out. So it's been a major part of my life, and it's very, very rewarding, very, very stressful at times. But the idea that while I'm taking skills that I have, with paramedicine or organizational skills or brute strength in some cases, and bringing those to a place where I can have some aspect of effect.
I always, your Facebook posts are always a highlight for me in terms of the pictures of these places. And we're used to seeing the more touristy side of the world, to see post-disaster pics, to see places that I know are active war zones, to see like Ukraine. That it just, it's always very eye-opening. If people wanted to donate something, what would be the best route to go about it?
Go through the website. It's globalmedic.ca, and it has all the information there. But it's very, pretty well 100% of all donations go to operations.
Bang for your buck.
Bang for the buck, exactly.
And you get a tax write-off.
There you go. If you wanted to volunteer, we have packing days where we go to the warehouse. We've got about 3 or 4 warehouses now, and it's literally packing food into boxes, packing filtration units into boxes, packing 45 boxes to a skid, 10 skids to an airplane or something. So the idea of packing all this stuff is we know that those supplies are getting to a place that are really needed. We were doing a packing to Mozambique one time, and it was packing foodstuffs and putting those, 20 little bags in no box, 45 boxes onto that skid, and you're wrapping those skids up and putting them in order so they could be transported that day. And we had a lot of the Mozambique community come in and help us pack, and they're writing messages on the boxes. And one of the main ones that really hit me hard, I forget the translation from the Mozambique language, but it was, "We are in this together." And it was really heartwarming to hear that, because it was like, wow, we are here doing this stuff. And shortly after that, I went to Mozambique and was receiving these boxes, right? And to see from the very start of being part of packing those boxes, and then all the way in Mozambique unpacking those boxes and delivering them to the villages that were hit by a major storm. It was like from the very beginning to the end product. It was quite an amazing experience.
For anybody who doesn't realize, most people in wars and disasters don't die of the wars and disasters. They die of the destruction of the infrastructure.
Yep.
The water, the lack of food, all that stuff. So this is a direct way to help and mitigate, the consequences of people who are just stuck in this awful tragedy, this horrible situation, or they have no fault in it at all. So it could happen to any of us. If you have some extra cash, if you're blessed out there, guys, and you want to do some good in the world, this is a wonderful organization to donate to.
Absolutely. There's and going back to who we are as humans and humanity and that sort of thing, we are not that far from some of the places I've been as far as the breakdown in infrastructure, like you say. A few years ago there was a major blackout in the eastern seaboard, and it was like, now what do we do? I was in a restaurant and they're saying, well, you may as well take all the food because it's going to go bad. So they're just giving out free cold stuff and that sort of thing. Well, that person, if that blackout hadn't ended and power went back on, lights went back on, that person's job is gone. That person's livelihood is gone.
Well, think about everything we use electricity for.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've heard that 2 weeks is all Manhattan needs before it's going to go into energy. So
growing up around the University of Guelph, one of my neighbors and friend of my parents was a big wig. He was on the National Council of Sciences for the Yankee. For anybody who doesn't know, they have like the top, I think, 150 scientists in any field. They form like a review board, and they're supposed to advise like the American government. And he did this for agriculture. So he's Ken Kasha, if you want to Google him. He passed away recently. Very great guy. He said basically at any time if photosynthesis stopped, we got about 4 weeks.
Yeah.
You said if production shuts down, we're 4 weeks and we're about done.
And you look at the whole environmental aspect of global warming and that sort of stuff. It's a big threat to what's going on. And we're seeing the effects through more storms or droughts or rains, flooding, and that sort of thing. We aren't, we're very, very blessed to be here. I take a flight for 5 hours and end up in Haiti. And, the overall situation there is not good on any level.
No.
But the idea that I could go there and try and help out a little bit, I was there, I don't know, a few years ago now after a hurricane in the kind of the west side of the island. And, you take a place that has nothing, has less than nothing, and then you hit it with a hurricane and take whatever little bit away. And, you stand there and you just look at the desolation of what used to be a thriving community or thriving village. And, the sadness of that contrasted with, well, the little bit I can do to hopefully make it a little better. Be it Haiti, be it Mozambique, be it, Nepal during the earthquake, the Philippines during Typhoon Haiyan. We're going to places now like we were in Romania, right on the border with Ukraine, and going packing food and everything in Romania, bringing it across the border.
Is this during the recent conflict?
Yes.
There? Oh,
Yeah.
not recent, the current conflict.
Yeah, and bringing foodstuffs across. We're nowhere near the combat zone. We would not do that, but about 200 kilometers in. But we're seeing the effects of displaced persons, internally displaced persons, moving west away from the battle, and the effects it's having on the villages and small cities that are under pressure now to handle another 30,000 people, 50,000 people, whatever. And so, we're able to bring in a little bit of, I won't say a little bit, we're bringing in food to help with those displaced people and to see the gratitude and the thankfulness that they have. And it's not, big guy coming in to rescue the world. That's not the case, whatever. We're doing what we can with what we got. And the idea of getting, the right thing to the right people at the right time, be it food, be it shelter, be it, filtration units, whatever. Any little bit helps, I guess, is the phrase I would use. But, again, I'm very, very blessed to be able to do that in my life, to be able to, have that support of Global Medic and bring whatever skills I have to that area where they may need. And it's not always that. I mean, I still go into the warehouse and pack boxes, because that's
real work.
Yeah.
That-
There's also a supply chain behind absolutely everything in this world. Why would
And we
there
s-
be a huge supply chain behind
And we
something like
starved to
that?
death without it, as we
Yeah.
learned during certain events recently.
Yeah.
Like, you think about how many people live in the Greater Toronto area.
Yeah.
You think about all the goods that have to be brought into this area for people to exist.
Mhm.
And if that breaks down,
You mean you don't just get your food from the grocery store? And so,
But I'd say for myself at this point, I'm 64 years old, and the experiences I've had from growing up in the inner city, growing up with poverty, growing up with family problems and concerns and all that sort of thing, and coming from there, getting out of that potential cycle where and sometimes I'll still go back to Cabbagetown, and then sometimes I'll see people I saw as children become parents, become grandparents, and they just cycle back into, be it the strife or the alcoholism or the sadness and that. A lot get out, and that's fine. And a lot are they live within that community and they're fine. I'm not stereotyping at all, but from my own experience of getting out of that and living the life I have up to this point is quite amazing. I look back at my travels or my martial art training or going to university or my education, that sort of thing. It's been a tremendous journey, and certainly I look forward to many more years of doing that while I can, because there's a lot of things that still need to be done out there, and I'm happy to be part of doing that.
and that'll be an amazing legacy
Mm.
to leave. It'll be a wise man said, look for the helpers in any horrible situation. And it's been wonderful to be able to interview one of the helpers today.
Thank you.
The guy who's really done a lot for me personally, done a lot for the community, done a lot for the world. So hopefully you enjoyed this podcast. Do you want to shout out the organization one more time? Let's start with the club.
Certainly if you're interested in learning more about Global Medic, it's at globalmedic.ca.
yeah.
and there's certainly opportunity to volunteer. If you wanted to go overseas, there's that opportunity. You have to take a course, you have to do some online work, and have whatever skills are needed for that.
Yeah, I'll put a link in the episode description when this goes up.
And do you want to show the club?
Yeah, the club I teach in Guelph. It's called the Guelph Jingmo Kung Fu Club. It's at 42 Quebec Street, right downtown in Guelph, and I teach Mondays and Thursday evenings from 8 to 9:30.
Now, there's one thing I need to touch on before we go. You have the most unbelievable collection of weapons that I think I've ever seen. I got to tell this anecdote. We were helping Sifu move at one point, and all these, again, he's very modest, but he's easy on the eyes. So all these women are coming out on their porches to watch him come in with this thing, and then we start unloading all the weapons and all the pole arms and all the swords, and the women just one by one go back in and lock them. But it's an unbelievable collection. I think you inherited it.
No, in the 80s, it's a Chinese martial arts, a lot of kind of medieval weaponry, swords and spears and pitchforks and all that. And I searched in antique stores, and I think once I by fluke came upon a sword and said, "Oh, I want that." Boom. So for a lot of the 80s, I spent a lot of money on purchasing various weaponry from about 1800 to early 1900s China. So the Qing and a bit of the Ming Dynasty. So I got about 15 pieces, and quite nice. They're a part of history. And so I like that aspect, and it connects to my traditional martial art training, where I've learned how to use these weapons in one way or another. So absolutely, it's a bit of a hobby.
It was always interesting for me to see you do a weapons demonstration, because I can only fight barehanded. I never was able to really learn the weapon systems, but just to see it come back to such a martial army, kind of like, especially the pole arms and the sword, like just to, I was reminded of like cadets doing drill.
Yeah.
And learning the movements and just tying that all together. With now, there's one weapon that is my absolute favorite, and that is the tiger fork.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is, if you don't know what it is, guys, an unbelievable weapon. It's got the movements, or just the crouching and the movement. It's just, it's like a trident almost.
Yeah, it's
like
a trident.
curved.
Yep.
It's a trident.
Yep.
And I just have these memories of you doing these forms in the club. And it was always, when the tiger fork came out, I knew it was going to be a really interesting class.
Yeah. Well, I was going to demonstrate that on Saturday. I went to this big martial art banquet, and I had the tiger fork and that sort of thing. But the stage was like 8 feet by 4 feet, and the back wall was a big aquarium. So instead of becoming Neptune or Aquaman, I figured, no, I'm not going to do. I did a hand form instead. But
discretion is the better part of valor.
Absolutely.
Or you break it, you buy it.
Yeah.
Whatever cliche you want to go with.
Yeah. But thank you very much for inviting me on to your podcast.
Thank you for coming.
It's an amazing experience for me, and look forward to hearing what comes out of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We'll send you the link. All right, you know the drill. Like and subscribe on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Support us at kofi.com/Radio Free History or at subscribestar.com/radio-free-history.